The mountains top, walk on water. I got power, feel so royal. 1 second, I'ma strike for you.
Yeah, the Ultimate Turnout kit comes with 4 pieces of rail, 2 longer and 2 shorter. The 2 longer pieces will be your stock rails, which if you don't know, those are the outside rails. And the 2 shorter pieces should make up your closure rails, which come from the toe side of the frog rails, and the guard rails. Start with the curved stock rail, and if you look at the template, there's a portion on the template that'll tell you sharp bend in rail, which goes right before the first head block tie. You could file this with a little file to get a little tiny notch into the rail just to make sure you get a sharp bend. So we'll just take a whole file. And find a little tiny notch. I'll do one on the opposite side just to give it a little relief. And this is on the curved side. So I have that little notch. Line it up, give it a little bend right there. So that's probably too much of a bend, but we can correct it back. That's too much. And this is just how the prototype does it also. This is the portion where the points will meet up with the stock rail. So it needs a little relief bend in there in order to fit. After you've made your sharp bend in the rail, and basically the tie plates now act as like a jig. As to where the rail goes. This is barge cement mixed with MEK. I'm just going to tap a little bit on each tie. You don't even really need to depress the plunger, because this stuff kind of drips out on its own. But if you do, just ever so slightly touch it. And you're aiming for the little D section on each tie plate. That is where the rail is going to cover. Okay, I've applied the barge and MEK, and I'm just going to let it tack up for a little bit. And I'm going to apply some at the end of the rails here. That should help keep them in place. Now I'm just going to set my rail in place. And I'm paying attention to where I keep that little sharp bend in the rail. Keep that in place. And follow the rail along the curve all the way to the end, into the tie plates. The tie plates become my jig, basically. Apply pressure. And you may get some barge and MEK overflow here and there, and spare drops. Once this dries, I usually like to spike some of this down and clean up the excess with MEK, or if I don't want to spike it, I'll clean up the excess a little at a time with MEK, so I'm not loosening the whole thing. Look at what this looks like. Back up and look at it from the other side. Like I said, the rail falls into place in those ties, the grooves in the ties. So, but it's good to visually double check that they're in the right place. I have my curved stock rail installed, and before I install the straight stock rail here, I put my throw bars in and extended them all the way over. I pushed them all the way over. I'm going to try not to get any glue on these because I don't want them to get stuck. But I put them in now so I don't have to try to cram them underneath at the end. And that way I can use both stock rails to sight my frog. You can also use a micro brush to apply your barge and MEK. Just dip it in your barge and MEK mixture a little bit and hit the tie plates. And also hit the base of the rail some. Okay, I'm going to sight the frog here, and basically I kind of laid it in a general position here, and you can use the nubs on the frog plates, the little bolt heads, to kind of get it generally into place. Then you want to take your track gauge and ensure that you have a good gauge. Okay, straight side's good. Once you get the straight side set, you can slide this forward and backward to get a wider gauge on the curved side, forward to get a narrower gauge. So what we'll do is I'll just kind of do a test fit here, and then I'll put some barge cement onto the frog plates and put it in place. So I'm going to put some barge cement onto the frog plates here and place the frog. Get a little bit on the front here. The barge cement is kind of tacked up here for my frog. Got it somewhat into place. I'll get my gauge back out. And I like to start with the straight side gauge and make sure I got it. And then I can check my curved side. Before my frog totally dries into position, I also want to check the frog rail position. Make sure they kind of line up. They look like they're going to do just right. And the closure rail position, make sure those are going to line up. That looks good. And that looks good. I'm installing one of the frog rails. Same with the other rails. I've used barge cement, and I just cut this thing to length. And I like to leave a little gap between the frog here. And you probably already know, but that's just so we can isolate the frog and power it separately. DCC friendly. There shouldn't be any problem with the track gauge on these because the tie plates act as the jig. Place it down. I already put some barge and MEK on the tie plates, so that's all taken care of. leave a little gap. Oops, that's it. Double check the gauge. Looks good. And you don't have to leave an air gap here. You can even fill it with plastic or some braille gap fillers. Test fitting a rail for the closure here. I'll start with the straight closure. And the closure is going to go from basically the toe of the frog down to between the heel tie, or the heel tie plates. Right there and right there. If you're confused about where they go, consult the template on the Proto 7 website. So I'll put it down here. I'll leave a gap between the frog and the end of the rail. You might notice there's a tie plate missing. It fell off, but we'll reattach it when we do the rail. So got my little gap, and here's where the heel is going to go, and I'm just going to mark it so I can cut it right there and cut it there. Let's save that extra little piece to make our guardrails. I'm going to fit my, or pre-fit my curve closure rail. I've kind of bent it a little bit, just with my fingers. Get a little bit of a curve into it. And I'm going to sight it right up against the frog, leaving a little gap. And run it through these tie plates all the way down to where the heel hinge is. I got that test fit. I'm going to give it a mark. So I can clip the rail right there. So I got my mark. I'll just take it and clip the rail. And the extra half I'll leave to make frog rails out of, or to make guardrails out of. And this is the point where we're going to need our hinge. I'm test fitting my closure rails, and I want to take my hinge, slide it onto her, slide it onto the end, and then test fit my closure rail again into where it's going to go. Just leaving a gap with the frog, and closure rail here. This is the curved one I'm test fitting first. And what I'm looking for here is that this hinge is not forcing the closure rail to too tight of a gauge. So it's cut just right. The gauge is just right here. So we'll go ahead and glue this into place. Okay, so I used a little barge and MEK to install the closure rail. I put some super glue underneath where the joint goes, the hinge, on the fixed portion of the hinge. So that should help hold the hinge into a certain place. I can do the straight rail now. So again, I'll test fit it by putting the hinge onto the rail. I'll test fit it by putting the hinge onto the rail. Test fitting the rail into the tie plates. Leaving a gap for the frog, of course. And I'm making sure that when the hinge / heel block pushes up against the stock rail, it's not pushing my track out of gauge. Okay, looks good. So I'll lift it up, put some glue in, and put it in place. Another good gauge to have on hand is a set of wheels. Everything runs smooth.